Hi everyone, welcome to Flyleaf Books, and tonight we're here to listen Alison Hart discuss her new novel, The Work Wife. She's joined here tonight by Lauren Le Blanc. My name is Marilla, and I'm the Events and Social Media Coordinator here at Flyleaf Books, and I'd like to thank you all for supporting your local indie. It really helps us to keep bringing the right programs like this one to you in the future. I just want to say that we are recording tonight's event, and it's going to go up in our YouTube channel within a few weeks. And lastly, we ask the authors to conclude by 7 p.m. so that we can be mindful of our colleagues who are closing up the store. Alison Hart's writing has appeared in Joy On magazine, the Missouri Review, the Millions, the Offing, and Florida Review. She is the co-founder of the long-running reading series at the Kenny Store and received her MFA from the New School. She grew up in Los Angeles but now lives in North Carolina with her family. And fun fact, The Work Wife is her first novel, which is amazing. It's a great book. Lauren Le Blanc is the New York Observer's book columnist and an independent book editor. She has written for the New York Times Book Review, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, and the New York Times. She is a New Orleans native, but now lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Allison. Am I on? Can you hear me all right, everybody?
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah. Allison, would you like to read a little start?
Okay. Sure. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 1. And chapter 1 is told from Zan's point of view. The book is told from 3 characters' perspectives, and it's set in one day. So what you need to know about Zan is she's a 38-year-old personal assistant to a famous director / movie mogul. And she works at his family's estate in Pacific Palisades. And in the back of the property, there's like a ring of cottages, which is where all the staff works. So on this particular day, she's covering for the personal staff's chief of staff for the very first time. So it's a big day. There's a fundraising party in the evening, and she's hoping that if everything goes well and she does a good job today, she'll get a promotion. At 6:30 a.m., an email crashed into Zan's inbox, shattering her flow. "Monkey got loose. In the server cage. Come quick." 90 seconds later, Zan stood among the small crowd of landscapers gathered at the end of a long hall in the IT cottage, fingers pressed against their ears to tune out the high-pitched screeching. She poked her head inside the server room to confirm with her eyes what her ears already knew. Yep, that right there, crouched atop the racks, was Alfie, an escaped capuchin monkey that was supposed to be adorable in a suit and well-behaved and good with all people, including children. Instead, he was losing it. "Shit show," Zan said under her breath. If only Bill, the animal handler, had arrived on time at 10 a.m. instead of keeping farmer's hours, this would have been the events team's problem and not hers. Then again, you could go down a rabbit hole of if-onlys. If only Holly Stabler hadn't thought a jungle nursery theme for tonight's party would be cute. If only academic jobs grew on trees. If only capitalism didn't exist. Life had taught Zan to let go of hypotheticals and deal with the conditions before her. She shouted at the others, "Where's Bill?" One of them pointed to the storage room next door, where a ladder was set up beneath the access panel to the cottage's attic. She climbed up and popped her head in the vaulted space. "How's it going, Bill?" she hollered. Bill Jorgensen, solidly built with a full beard that had already gone white, could have had a thriving film and TV career as Santa Claus. Surprised to see her, he hiked up his jeans by the belt. "I thought maybe I could get him from above, but if I punch down through the ceiling, I'll get debris all over him." "And the server," she shouted. "That too," he said, nodding. "Jesus Christ," Zan said quietly, wondering for the millionth time how so many men got their stellar reputations when all she'd ever seen them be was average. "Come on down, Bill," she said. Zan hopped off the ladder and went down the hall to where the IT workstations were set up. She followed the maze of gates strong enough to protect state secrets, grabbed the server cage keys from the safe, and doubled back in time to find Bill pleading with Alfie to settle down, bud. Alfie would not. At the sight of Zan, he shrieked his displeasure. She flinched. What was that sound? Part pig, part cricket, part laser to the meat of her brain. She put the key in the padlock and paused. Now, Bill, she said, when I open this cage, are we going to have a problem? Alfie's my best baby. Don't worry, I've got this. Okay, get ready. Zan turned the key in the padlock and opened the cage door. Alfie stopped vocalizing, watching with interest as Bill walked in to comfort him, arms outstretched as if reaching for his son. That's right, bud, you're such a good boy. Or was he? Alfie screeched, jumped on Bill's head, punched him in the air, and scrambled down his back and out of the cage. Zan watched it happen, powerless to do anything but jump out of the way. Bill spun around like a confused tornado. Out in the hall, the landscapers let out a chorus of expletives. Bill tore after his monkey, down the corridor and out the front door, the men close at their heels, leaving behind a stench that reeked of smoke, something electric, and faintly of urine. An archipelago of droplets lay on the tile floor, and the main server began to hiss. Fuck me, Zan said. She pulled out her phone and dialed the IT manager. I'm 20 minutes out, he said, a note of panic in his voice as if he'd been caught out past curfew. The monkey pissed on the server. We need to switch over to the backup. Zan could hear his gears turning, trying to yoke those three disparate words, monkey, pissed, and server, into the kind of logic problem MIT had trained him to solve. Now, Greg, talk me through it, she said. The next 10 minutes were tense and ridiculous. Not the red wire, I said the blue wire, like they were in their own buddy cop movie, but also strangely satisfying for Zan. To have foreseen, if not the monkey itself, then the possibility of network failure, to have averted it by good planning, to have been the one, always the one, to make things right. It was why Ted and Holly Stabler had hired her, why she'd climbed so quickly up the ranks of their personal staff of 30. Afterwards, Zan filled a bucket with soapy water and mopped the floor clean, allowing herself this brief moment to do one thing well before she returned to the problem of the monkey. So many parts of the job were like this, almost soothing in the precision and patience they required, if you could find her way past ludicrous banality to meditative enjoyment. She made it outside just as Bill coaxed Alfie down from a fig tree, slipping a leash over the monkey's head. Zan tugged at her short black hair. Nothing surprised her about this job anymore. Not the range of competencies it required, from a fluency with security protocols and two-factor authentication to an encyclopedic knowledge of Minecraft and LOL surprise dolls, or the succession of raises she'd received, each bigger than the last, or the deep sense of personal responsibility she felt to make the Stabler family's dreams come true, come what may, of her own. Now she could add monkey wrangling to her resume, too. What'd I tell you, Bill said, beaming at Zan, as if he'd just lassoed the moon. Alfie's fired, Bill, she said. Today was too important to the Stablers, and to her future here, to be derailed by predictable chaos. Zan would keep this day on track, and nothing, not an ill-behaved monkey, or a tech disaster, or a ho-hum party would get in her way.
So much. It's funny. When I was reading this book earlier this summer at the pool, people kept stopping me to ask me what I was reading. And it was just really exciting to pick up a book that was appealing to everyone who is out there and be able to talk so enthusiastically about it. I wanted to talk with you because the book does take the perspective of three different women across the time of this one day. And could you tell us a little bit about those three women and how they're connected to one another?
Yeah, sure. And just before I do that, I should say, I know there were some bad words, so if I owe anybody here some money for your swear jar, like, just come see me afterwards. Okay, so Zan, we've just met. You know, she's the personal assistant. She's also gay. She grew up in LA and had to leave town and is now back and came back for this job that she couldn't believe was a thing, but it is, and she can't believe she's good at it, but she is. So that's Zan. And then the next person you meet is Holly, who is the wife of this family. And so Zan and Holly are about the same age, but that's about the only thing they have in common.
Right.
Well, whiteness, they have that too. Holly grew up just outside of LA, middle class, and was an artist, and went to art school. And the trustee, who she was not on her mental radar, but is this famous director, and that's when they met, was when he came to her open studio and kind of took a shine to her. So she's been married since she was young and had kids, and kind of, he was already famous, and she just sort of joined the circus that was his life, and kind of has seen her, like, some of her like real touch qualities kind of disappear as she's joined this circus.
And it's been about, I think they were married for 15 years
about
or
15
so.
years, exactly.
The point of the book, the novel, okay.
Yeah. So then the third person is Phoebe, and Phoebe is a woman from Ted Fast. So she went to college with Ted, and they had a relationship, and they were partners creatively as well. She's also a filmmaker like Ted, and she's Korean American. And so they came to LA together to make films, and just they planned to make each other's films, but the way things worked out, his went first. And his became so big, and his films, he made his name with like a trilogy of films called The Starfighter. So that gives you kind of a sense of the kind of art, kind of like where in Hollywood we're talking about, okay? So she, but something happens and their relationship collapses and she leaves town. That was 20 years ago. So she's been living in Oakland, teaching high school. In the summers, she like teaches digital animation to like middle schoolers, but she's always wanted to make a film and has eventually finally figured out how to make it herself. And on this day, she's come back to LA to try and sell it at this. There's a conference in the morning, and then there's these industry parties in the evening, and she's hoping that something will click for her.
Yeah. No, I think what's so interesting about me is that this book deals so squarely with the idea of work and kind of the intersection between the need for, why we need work, for sustenance, but also like how much of it is also partly rooted in passion and trying to find something that we're good at. And so often the things that we're good at aren't always necessarily the things that we love to do. And for these three women, they're sort of in this bind where where their needs are and their desires don't match up. But on this one day, they're thrown together in this kind of carnival to position themselves, I would say. Zan is looking for this promotion. Holly is trying to be taken seriously and be at this, breakfast that's talking about women's rights and their right in the workplace, but also creatively to try to create a space at the table for themselves. And Phoebe is also trying to do that despite various odds. And I was wondering if you could talk how you decided to bring it together for one day, like why that was critical to kind of expose this sort of challenge for these women.
Yeah, I think I just sort of, one of the earliest decisions I make when I'm writing is what the time frame is going to be, because I just sort of need that constraint. And so it doesn't have to be a day. This could have been 4 months, let's say, or it could have been a year, it could have been seasons. I don't know. There's so many different like gimmicks, but for whatever reason, it just came to me that it would be a day. I wanted it to be something where kind of they all have one shot, and I don't know. It was just, that was, some of my earlier readers were like, well, should you let it breathe more? And I was like, no. I don't want this one to breathe. I want it to be fast, and I want it to be a pressure cooker. And I think because, my very first draft was just all told from Zan's perspective. And so I was sort of attached to that idea of her work day. You know, you see her at the start and you see her at the end, and that was the arc. And so I just never saw a need to go away from that.
No, I think that works so well for the energy of the book and the pacing as well, because since you're able to encapsulate it into one day, we can see the paces of the day exactly how you showed it in that first passage, where we see the details of how the various fires she has to put out at each step of the way. And then you have an opportunity to see everyone else's as well. And I think you said that, no, you did say that Zan was the first character. What made you realize you needed to broaden this and have it not quite be exclusively a story about Zan?
Yeah. So when I got to the end of the first draft, which was like really lean and mean, like it was almost novella length, which was fine. I wanted to see if I could do something that was more lean and mean. But I felt like there were parts of the story that I was kind of having to like pretzel myself a little bit in order to find a way to give it to her, you know, to have it be coming from through her thoughts to us, and it didn't always make sense. So by the time I got to the end, I already kind of knew that I needed to have a perspective for Phoebe. So I did another draft where I rewrote and gave her, it was very clear at first, like, oh, that whole thing goes to Phoebe, that part goes to Phoebe.
How did that surface? I'm just curious. Like, what about Phoebe stood up for you that you realized she needed to be a larger part of the book?
I just knew I was really interested in her, and I really cared about her backstory, and I cared about like the kind of the binds that she was in. I cared about what would she have a pang about, and you know, it was like when somebody else is feeling your pangs for you, then you're doing it wrong. You know, like so I needed to give her own pangs, basically.
I also felt Phoebe was such an interesting contrast to Zan, who doesn't have, she, you know, suppressed her own kind of personal, passionate interests. And Phoebe has never let go of those things. And it's, you know, and as a devotion to kind of the work, like seeing things through and being a moral person and not wanting to cut corners, that she did step out and she felt like she needed to take a break. But she always kept that kind of the integrity that she had, but also those creative visions in mind, and over time they shaped and changed. But I thought the tension between the two of them was really compelling, and also helped them see themselves in the future in a different way as well. But how did you know? I guess too, I think it's interesting to me thinking about it in terms of content. Initially this was a novella, but was it a story as well? How were you shaping this, and what were you writing at the time? Is this the first novel you thought that you were going to write?
When I sat down to write it as a novel, it was always meant to be a novel. It was just that it came out pretty short, but I knew it wasn't a short story. I knew that was going to be a different thing, that this was going to have, you know, the tricks of a novel. But I did try writing with these characters way back when in a different form. And so in that iteration, it was a story collection, actually. It was a collection of linked stories, kind of like A Visit from the Goon Squad, if folks here have read that one. Like, that's sort of what I had in my head. And so it was, but it was very different. At the time that I wrote that, I was thinking a lot about marriage. I don't think we were married yet. I think I was just like, what is this crazy concept? How does that work? And so each story was like a look at a different marriage, and Ted and Holly's was one of them. And so kind of like the way I thought of it was concentric circles, and in the center was the Stabler estate, and Ted and Holly and everybody swarming around them. And then on the far reaches were people who had no relationship to them. And so I really liked that. It just didn't sell. So, and my agent said, well, let's see if we can get more of those stories placed, and that maybe, you know, then we'll try again. And so while I sent those out for submission, and it just takes forever to place a story, or unless you're lucky, and then it's really fast. But when you're not lucky, it takes a long time. And so while that was happening, I was working on other books, and they were novels. And that's when I started to realize, like, oh, I think I'm the novelist. I think that's how my brain works. So many years later, after I'd kind of given up on this, and I knew the stories weren't ever going to get published unless, or like is kind of, not in a strategic way. Mm-hmm. Let's say that.
Okay.
And yeah, I was thinking about the characters more and finally seeing how I would do it with my novelist brain. Mm-hmm. And I would get rid of the outer rings, and I would just focus in on the core. And Phoebe wasn't in that earlier collection, mm-hmm. but when I started thinking about it as a novel, I was like, we need a woman from Ted's Past. We definitely do.
Yeah, and I think it brings a texture to the novel that takes it to that level of being a novel as opposed to being a kind of slim novella and this one story. And I think you touched upon the idea of, this marriage and sort of, and I think the title itself is something that speaks to that.
How a crowded marriage.
Yes, it definitely is. I mean, any marriage where it involves a staff of people knowing the intimate details of your life in order to make that marriage work and make that industry work, and when your marriage is part of that industry, the image of it as well, something else that requires an enormous amount of upkeep. And so I think that idea too of like marriage as work, and I think that and how much that line becomes blurry for work itself is like, how much are you committed to the work itself, and how much are you committed to yourself, how much is the work committed to you as well. Could you talk a little bit about this idea of the work wife, and sort of there's one person, there's in a way everyone plays a role as being Ted's wife in this book, but everyone approaches it differently. So could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I guess I love the title, which I didn't come up with, but I like it because it the work wife can be like a really lovely concept, right? Like lots of us have work wives that like make our day bearable. Mm-hmm. That person that we can vent to, and they see all of our family photos and they know our history and they're lovely people. And I think oftentimes that relationship works best when the two of you are peers, when you're at the same level and the exchange is more fair. In this case, Zan is Ted's work wife, and she doesn't really have a choice about it. Mm-hmm. And it's her girlfriend who calls her and says, "You're the work wife," and it's not a compliment. She is,
But at that point, she sees that as her strength. Like she looks at the fact that she has achieved this as a measure of success.
Right. I mean, her job description is to do all of these things. It is to like let him offload emotional labor onto her, and other forms of labor too, but a lot of emotional labor. Mm-hmm. So I guess I was thinking a little bit about like what work wives mean to all of us, but also thinking too about a lot about like the emotional labor that we all perform, but especially that women perform. We do a lot of it at work. We do it in other forms of our areas of our life too. With the PTA and the soccer team and and in our marriages too. So she's busy. Zan's a busy person. She's carrying a lot of mental loads.
Yeah, and I think, and throughout the course of the book, she recognizes that those things that she saw as were indicators of success are not. And I think other people who think, realize that their emotional investment that doesn't necessarily translate into a measure of success. It's seen as sort of this passive, just superficial, something that's expected. And I'm speaking about Holly, Ted's wife. And I think that, that was the character that could have been a very flat character, and you brought a lot of dynamicism to her by making her someone who has never fully let go of the past, never fully let go of her desire, and yet is waiting for this critical moment where she's seen as someone who has some value, that has a lot to offer. And I think the book opening with her at this breakfast where she gives this impassioned lecture about because this is in the moment of Me Too, like trying to take women more seriously in film, and she is realizing that no one is taking her seriously, it sort of sets the tone for the book and for her greater awareness throughout the course of the book. Could you talk about what it was like to deal with Holly, who could be a very unsympathetic character?
Yeah. So when you first asked me about the characters, I should have mentioned that. So there's a conference happening in the morning of this day that's like the Producers Guild of America, essentially. And so she's not a producer, but she is now like sort of the most famous member of a like Time's Up like organization. And just by virtue of being Ted's wife, she's like the most famous face of it. And so she's been asked to come and give a speech at that conference, which she hires a speechwriter, her stylist helps her get ready, she's like in there, she's ready to be serious.
Seriously, yeah.
Yeah, and instead people are just eating, you know. Like they're just scraping their silverware on the plate. So sorry, wait, what was the question?
Oh no, I'm just wondering what it was like. I feel like Holly is someone who could have easily been a
Yes,
very
right.
throwaway
Have
character. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think, and sort of this intermediary between Ted and Zan, and
Yeah.
you know, and giving kind of a different sort of, and the thing too about Zan being gay, there's no confusion about the nature of their relationship at all.
Yeah.
So Holly is in no way threatened by Zan.
Yeah.
But what else is the friction and the conflict between them that
Yeah.
sort of keeps the plot going?
So yeah, I mean, Holly is somebody that people think about a lot, right? Like America thinks about her a lot because she's in like tabloids and stuff. She's like just smiling beside her, you know, many awarded husband.
I kept thinking of her as the Rita Wilson.
Yeah.
In this situation.
Yeah. That's a good example. And then Zan has a lot of feelings for her because, you know, Zan works on that family staff and so, you know, finds her kind of frustrating and difficult to please and, you know, doesn't love having to like have such an intimate awareness of all of her needs and desires and preferences and priorities and all that.
And she's a woman who doesn't have to work. She has no need for that.
She doesn't need to work. It probably would be good for her if she did do more work. And she had something going on besides just this circus. But, and then Phoebe thinks about Holly a certain bit too, because, you know, this is who her ex has moved on with. And, you know, whether she wants to pay attention to her or not, she just is constantly, because of fame, is constantly confronted with her and is kind of curious about who Ted moved on to. Because Phoebe was, you know, doing a lot of the things that Zan does for Ted, Phoebe did in the early days too. And so I was kind of curious about who's doing those things for him now. So it was, I think because she's so thought about, it was like a really good chance to be like, but what is the person who's being thought of all the time? What is that person thinking? You know, and she doesn't think that she's awful, and she doesn't think that she's just, you know, a pretty face, like, so.
Yeah, she's at an interesting point in her career and in her life with him, and I think, you know, it's something else too, just thinking about it as well is the way that, you know, Ted is this figure who is at the center of the book, but we don't see things from his perspective.
Yes.
And it's refreshing to have that be the nature of this book. The other thing I was going to say too is that Phoebe is trying to figure out this mystery of how Ted gets it done. And I think that's another thing that the book is really great about stripping away at, is this idea of, I think there's so many different figures like him who you have to wonder who these mysterious people who fall under the category of entrepreneur, what does that mean, and how do they accomplish it, and how is one person capable of doing so many different things? And there's always going to be all these different people behind him. The adage about, you know, behind every great man is a great woman, but in this case it's 3 different ones.
Yeah. And a personal staff of 30.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
that helps considerably. Yeah, I think, how much did it matter that it was set? We've talked about this. It's like, how much of it was set in LA? And we can get into it as well. I think like this, coming from your own experience, you are a writer. You've been trained to do it. It's part, you know, it's something that is part of your pedigree. But also, you spent a considerable amount of your time working as a personal assistant, executive assistant. How did that inform the book as well? And was it something you felt reluctant to writing about at first? And how did you come to it ultimately?
Yeah. So yeah, I worked on and off for a wealthy family for many years. And so, I mean, originally I didn't want to write about it. Like, kind of who wants to write about their job? You know, like today I sent tons of emails with lots of people CC'd on them. Like it just, anybody's job can seem boring if you really think about it.
But I mean, did you ever have a moment like with the monkey?
Never a monkey, but yes, there's always something that you're doing where you're like, what on earth, like,
and only of these people,
yeah, and you're like, wait, why am I doing this on a Saturday? Or like, oh, I'm missing dinner for this. Wait, what? Like, there's always something crazy that you're doing. But yeah, so I mean, but I didn't do it in Hollywood, and I, wasn't doing it in the film industry, and so that was part of why I wanted to set it there was, I wanted to, because this is definitely not my story and it's for fiction, and I wanted there to be no doubts about that. So setting it in Hollywood was a way to totally remove it and fictionalize as much as possible. And also, like, the thing with if you make that much money, is you can kind of get whatever you want, right? And you have people who are there to help you get whatever you want. Like, you just ask for it. If you're willing to pay enough, most things can be made and can be made to happen pretty quickly. And I think of Hollywood as that place too, right? Like, it's where we make dreams come true. Blah, blah, blah. So that was another way to just kind of underscore that thing of like, anything is possible on a moment's notice. No matter how crazy, you can make it look good. Do it.
Yeah. And then there's Phoebe, who shows the contrast to that, right? So that not everything is possible and not every dream is going to be fulfilled. Maybe you'll do it in different ways. Maybe you'll try a different channel. But, I think that her story, is very poignant in that way, in that, and I can see how she would be coming back to you again and again and having to take that larger role in the book, because it does show that, you can have a job and also that money isn't always everything, right? So that even if you are Zan, and Zan's girlfriend, Gabby, also makes that clear when she points out that this is not the beautiful life you think you have. What more do you want, and at what point, what is success, and how is that something that you live with every day, or is it something that's always out of reach that you're just trying to achieve down the line? I think that, and Phoebe, how does Phoebe's work contrast with Ted's, and is that something that could you talk about that process of what that meant for you in terms of developing the book and in terms of developing these characters?
Yeah, sure. So Ted is somebody who's been allowed to have the long career and therefore to be able to grow and flex all these muscles and try lots of different properties. So when they both started out, they were kind of playing in the same space of like, kind of just these big epics, like a Star Wars or like a Matrix, or, think of those types of films. But he did those. He got them out of his system. There were other things he wanted to try, and so now he's like making smaller, more intimate films that might not always like totally suit him, but probably other people could make. But he's very technically proficient. He excels in a technical way. Phoebe has been trying to get this one story made the whole time. It's called The Warrior Bride, and it's it follows a young girl who's like is being forced to marry the governor. She doesn't want to. She sort of mounts a rebellion. She's a warrior. There are fight scenes. But it's kind of glorious. But the story has gotten darker over time. Like, when she finally makes it, she's not working off that same original script, because her life is, things have not worked out for herself. So she takes a darker view on things. So I wanted the things that they worked on to be something where you could see how when they were young and starting out that they would be coming from a similar place, and that they could potentially make each other's films and each find something that they would want to make in them, but that but their developmental paths are so much different.
Yeah, I love that they shared this kind of origin point and this kind of, then they began as collaborators and then it splintered off. And it said so much to me too about the nature of kind of creative work, that we have this mythology that it has to be one person and it has to be this figurehead who's kind of the savior. But also, and that also comes with its own complications, because I think down the line, Phoebe has, because life has affected her, because she has had to fight so hard for this, and she's informed by all these influences of being a teacher, having different relationships, moving around, that brings some other dynamics into the work. Whereas Ted is someone for whom everything has been done for him. And I remember very much, it struck me towards the end of the book when there's a moment where Zan realizes this is a man who no longer knows how to do things for himself. Yeah. He's no longer independent. He may have all this wealth, but it cripples him from being able to make action.
Learned helplessness.
Yes, exactly. And that also shifts the nature of the work. He moves from being this person who was a creative filmmaker to then just sort of being this facilitator as a producer and sort of this larger industry of, offering the studio and creating space for other filmmakers and then taking credit for it. Talking about that in any way, if you would riff on that or, speak to, how does Zan fall into that? Because for her, how did she end up in Los Angeles? Why is she still here? She could be doing that sort of work in New York. Why is she, what is it in it for her other than just the paycheck? Is there something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like sort of the work of the book for her, is to figure out why is she doing this? And she thinks she's doing it for the money, and that definitely matters, for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's, I'm the kind of writer where I always need to know how people pay their bills. Like when people don't have jobs or or they never come up short for the bill. I just need to know how everybody's doing it. And so
it reveals a lot about the writer when that's not something that's made clear.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, Zan, for sure, the money is a big part of it, but I think she has kind of some unrealized desires for herself and hasn't really been able to figure it out. What is her creative spark? So, I mean, she grew up in LA. Her mother died, and she grew up with a single mother. When her mother died, she moves back east to live with her father. And as soon as she graduates high school, she's like, peace out, and goes back to LA. And she gets a job as a production assistant at a studio. And just kind of flails, can't figure out how to make it, can't figure out what she's doing, can't figure out how to support herself, develops a drug habit, it's not going well for her. So she sort of pulls herself together and gets out of there, goes back east, goes to college. But as a PhD, she's a PhD candidate and is trying to figure out how that's going to work and still kind of can't. But she sees this ad for this crazy job and is like, wait, what? And has these visions of going to work for Miss Havisham or Yanni or what is it? Where am I going? And it turns out it's an ad to work for him. So, but because she's here to support this creative genius, but really not in the making of anything creative. Mm-hmm. She's just there to make the gears turn smoothly in his life. So while you could look at it as well, this is such a great opportunity, and what an opportunity for mentorship, and he could be, she could be an apprentice to him. That's not the work that she's getting.
I think that the book also has a lot to say about revealing sort of who gets to assume certain tracks in creative fields, because so many people think when they're not a part of the industry that they can come in as an assistant, gain that knowledge, and then get to the next step of the ladder. And I mean, for myself, I remember my first job of that nature, someone saying to me, there's two tracks here. There's the assistants and there's the senior editors. Yeah. And you will not cross over at all. And I appreciated that transparency. I think I have the hubris of youth to think, but I will make a difference. And then I think the thing about this book really exposes that, so often employers are not invested in seeing their employees succeed, because then they're going to lose their best workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think any boss can be the boss who's like, how can we make this work for you? What do you want to get out of it? You could always have that conversation in the beginning, and Ted could teach her everything. You know, he could if he wanted to. He doesn't want to.
Right.
He doesn't want that from her. He just wants her to make things easy for him. He doesn't even really want to have a relationship. He just wants her to like show up invisibly and do things for her.
Right. I was going to say, he already decided he was going to shed that notion of being a collaborator, right?
Yeah,
it's purely a one-man show.
Yeah. And so really for Zan, it might have been better if she was lousy at this and just got fired on the first day and had to go and find another job and like confront like, what do I really want? But because she's good at it, she just keeps getting more work on her plate and, raises and so she gets like locked into this work even more. And it does kind of allow her to not really confront the big question inside herself. It's like, what does she really want?
Yeah, I remember feeling that there was absolutely no incentive in being very good at picking up lunch. Ever. And I think Zan is someone who needs to realize that is not,
Yes.
But no, I'm trying. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I think that how do you see what conversation do you feel like you have with other novels, and what were you reading at the time that you were writing this? Like, what was informing it and helping you shape it from something that at first seemed like it was going to occupy the space, and kind of the structure of something like A Visit from the Goon Squad? Like, how did you see it moving forward, and what were you reading to inform that going forward, like moving on with the book?
There are a lot of books that do stories in one day, but I actually found those later. I don't know. I think I got the idea of like the one day thing really more from like TV and movies and stuff, like, I don't know, like Weekend at Bernie's, like something crazy where you're just like one day, then you just keep piling things on that this person has to deal with. So a lot of the stuff that I was reading was really more nonfiction. I mean, I was, like I read Winners Take All, that book by Anand Giridharadas about like philosophy and how, philanthropy, about philanthropy and how we're sort of letting the billionaire class like write off a lot of their responsibilities to society by just being great philanthropists, as if that like balances the scale. But like the money that they're giving to philanthropy is really a drop in the bucket and just a way to allow them to have like a greater say in society. So it's not really helping balance the scales at all.
Yeah.
And I was reading like Rebecca Traister, and I was just thinking more about different kinds of power imbalances.
I was wondering character-wise if there was anything else that you saw that helped shape finding a bigger figure, someone like Phoebe, and how to flesh her out and how to flesh out Holly. Was there someone else who kind of you saw in that as well?
I mean, definitely with Phoebe, I was just trying to read as widely as possible because, she's Korean American, and so there's some stuff there that I can't access, and so was trying to just read more Korean American authors and talking to my friends who are Korean American and just trying to understand how certain moments, like not assume that she would react the way that I can imagine she might react. Like, how is she carrying some of the, different setbacks that have happened to her? How does she carry it that's maybe different than I would carry it?
Yeah. I wonder if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to keep chatting away, but okay.
So I saw, like maybe other people have, that your book was featured as Book of the Week in People magazine.
I feel very safe.
And I guess it's just, when I read, I sort of see a movie in my head, and like there's the question, could this ever be made into a movie because of the nature of the story?
Yeah.
About some producers or writers having so much control. And do you ever think of who would play the different characters?
Yes.
And did you think of that in that way when you were writing it too? Were you thinking about it in terms of like a movie in that way too?
I mean, yeah, there's some things that I would write that might be more experimental, where you're not thinking like, how would this be realized on the screen? But for something like this, sure, because like, I mean, that's just like, I this is the pop culture I belong to, right? Like, I watch TV and movies, so of course I think about like, who would it be? I mean, as far as like whether this can or could be, like, I certainly hope so. I've heard kind of like two arguments. One is that like, Hollywood loves to tell stories about itself. And then the flip of it is like, Hollywood would not want to tell this story because there's too much like inside dirt or whatever. But I mean, I just made it up. So like, I'm not trying to tell stories on anybody in Hollywood. Yeah.
Well, the success of Hacks, which I loved your piece in Lit Hub about that as well.
Yeah.
We'd also speak to that too. So.
Yeah, I mean, that TV show is amazing and so fun. I don't know if you guys have seen it on HBO. Some of you are nodding. Yeah, it's about a Joan Rivers-ish comedian and a younger comedian who's hired on to write jokes for her, and the like twisted relationship that develops between them. But in terms of like when I thought about these characters, like Phoebe in my head, I just always thought of Sandra Oh, like that. That's perfect for me. Holly, I'm thinking like Rita Wilson is a great example of like,
Yeah. Maybe she's a little older, but yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, she's definitely is older than Holly is, but a younger Rita Wilson, sure. I don't want to say really younger.
Yeah, no, I don't want to.
Terrible.
No,
Sorry,
she knows
I said
she's
that.
fabulous anyway.
She's great.
No
she can
judgment.
do anything.
Right.
Yeah. But also with the perfect like Connie Britton hair is kind of what I was picturing there. And then Zan is like a tricky one, like, because I don't feel like I see as many examples of Zan in media. I mean, other than maybe from like the L Word or something. So sure, like maybe a Shane or something.
I was going to say,
yeah.
K-Monic, but definitely.
Okay,
Yeah, I could see that.
I could do it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this is more of a just something that I was fascinated by. Oh God.
She's working the room.
But this is about Phoebe, and I don't know if I have this right or if it's just something that I thought that I noticed, but it seemed like in her early chapters, like her inner dialogue felt like there was some second guessing of her creativity. She was maybe her self-esteem had been damaged. But then in the later chapters, when we saw her interacting with other people, you could see that she was a very like formidable, intimidating woman, but she couldn't necessarily see that in herself. And I guess I wondered how intentional was that, the theme of confidence and, who was in charge of your confidence, because clearly she was a very capable producer, but things had happened that prevented her from showcasing her talent. Like in the Gatehouse, that one scene where everyone just suddenly started working, feverishly when she was around. Like there's something about her that like commands a presence. So I just wondered, when you're developing her character, how much of that did you think about?
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, thank you so much for listening on that. Yeah, so Phoebe is somebody who, I mean, she did have a very successful stint in Hollywood in her earlier days, like producing Ted's films, and she's the one who's making everything happen. Like he gets to be in his little creative bubble, and she's the one who's taking all the meetings with all the execs and just keeping all the trains coming into the station on time. So I think she knows this about herself, that she is a capable person, but she hasn't really had, and she for sure would command like her classrooms the exact same way. Mm-hmm. So she knows that about herself, but she doesn't know that she also met more pushback than Ted ever would. Ted asks for something and it's done. She asks for something and there's always a little bit of a bristling about it. Like, is she entitled to ask for that? Is that okay? Like, nobody quite, like, they fear her, but they also are a little bit bothered by what she wants all the time. So I think Hollywood in particular is the place that like she always knows she's going to get like that meet that resistance. And so I think some of the doubting is coming from that, and also knowing that when they started out, she thought of herself as the better filmmaker. Like you know, no offense, Ted, but she's better. But he's had all these years to play and to grow, and she didn't get to. So I think that's part of where she's losing a little bit of confidence in herself too. But she does still have that. It's just in her personality, and her mom has it too. So she sees it in her mom. She knows how to just go in and command a room. And it happens. And Zan has that a little bit too. The other people that she works with kind of fear her as well. And I think they recognize that. They see that quality in each other too.
Yeah, I think that's a really, it's a really good dynamic that they share. And I think that also, that idea that the genius can hide behind that kind of artistic engagement, and then they can opt out of doing the work. Someone else is left behind to do that. So I think it was easy for him to fall back into that role. And I think that, for lots of reasons, she becomes this person who's called the Dragon Lady. And I think that was a way that people could diminish her power as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to comment, the racism in that with the Dragon Lady is quite another element of the book that I thought was an easy character was interesting. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah.
I'll speak into the microphone. So my question is about Zan's girlfriend, wondering like that part of her, how she kind of engages in the day when she comes on the estate for her part. Was she always, in your original sort of permutations, was she kind of a little, foil to Zan in so many ways, or did she change as you were developing and changing the book from that original plan into the novel form?
Yeah, thanks for that question. She was always there, even way back when I was doing it as a story collection, because their relationship was one of the kinds of, they're not married, but that was one of the relationships that I was looking at. So I think that's interesting to think of it as a foil, for sure. I mean, so Zan is dating somebody much younger than her, like about 15 years, and that's a similar age gap between Ted and Holly. Yeah. And I think now with Me Too, there's, she's able to be like, oh, that's kind of a power imbalance, yeah. And yet she's in this relationship. And so I think I always thought that Gabby is there to have a different perspective. I mean, first of all, she's just coming to the place for the first time. It's her first day ever being stepping foot on the estate. So it kind of helps the reader see things with fresh eyes through, what it is. Because you're with Zan and you see just how all the things she's making happen. But when you're with,
she has no time to reflect.
She doesn't have time to reflect.
There's no way
she's
for
too
her
busy
to take a big picture.
Yeah,
and
but when
Gabby
Gabby comes, Zan kind of gives her the tour, so you get to see like what Gabby's seeing and the stuff that's truly weird about it, because it's not weird to Zan anymore. She's a nerd to it. So part of it is just to have this turn, maybe whatever. I'll project.
Do you want to take my?
Oh, no, I don't know how to do it. Okay, sorry, everybody. Are they both off? No. Okay, great. So yeah, part of it is just to have that like fresh eyes, but also to have a little bit of a generational clash, because this job is not the first time Zan's ever like had to compromise anything in her life. Like she's of an age where she has made many compromises, but Gabby's like fresh out of college, and she comes to the estate because she's going to interview for a job here, and it doesn't necessarily, doing this kind of compromising doesn't necessarily seem like a great idea to her.
She's not in a deficit. Yeah. She doesn't have to. She can take this job or leave it. She's not like Zan. And that's the other thing that I think the book speaks to as well, is like, what are all the reasons that these people are here? There's so many secrets to uncover throughout the course of the book, which makes it a really interesting read too, is kind of piecing together what keeps people in this orbit when really no one's going to achieve some larger goal. No one's going to become the producer, right? Yeah. They're just going to be the driver or the housekeeper. Why are they there besides the money? And Gabby doesn't have that angle to have to work with, which liberates her.
Yeah, I mean, Gabby has something she wants to do in her life. Mm-hmm. She's just, still.
No, it's okay.
Because Gabby's pre-med and she's thinking that might be something that she wants to do, but she's in her early 20s, so she's like has that just that uncertainty that we all have, like when we're that age and we're just double checking with ourselves that this is what we want. So
Yeah.
Is it that time?
No, but I can check in my screen.
Oh, okay. Mic challenged.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hello.
Just thinking about the people who worked on the property. So James the driver and the cleaners, and we get a little glimpse of the cook who wears the same pants every day, and that seemed like a really fun part to me to picture these relationships between the characters, and I wonder if you drew on some of your own experience to kind of get that develop those personalities within that hive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I worked on this personal staff off and on for a long time, and so last week I was in New York to do some readings for the book, and a lot of them came out. You know, like I still know them and I love them. They were great people. And so you learn each other's quirks when you've known somebody for, I mean, some of them I've known like almost 20 years now, you know. So yeah, everybody has something that makes them a little memorable, and also like you also do sort of like slowly start to figure out like, oh, that's why that person's here and not doing that other thing. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the people everybody that I worked with was like, you know, so smart, so and so professional and so great at their jobs, but yeah, so smart, like have other things that they love to do, but you know, they just might not be able to support themselves on it, you know.
And I think it's interesting too, like what is it that forces people out of these roles? Like what is it that forced Phoebe to realize this was the time to get back into the game? Like how do you find that courage or reach that breaking point where you can't just continue with the status quo as it is?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I don't know. I think, like, isn't that the thing with life? Like, how do we all like make a big change? Mm-hmm. Stop doing something that like works but doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's someone outside of the situation to hold up a mirror to you in a way that you didn't see it otherwise. Like Gabby serves that function. And I think Zan as well, seeing Phoebe and realizing, wait, this person was famous, like who I, ran into in the bathroom, and, what is their story? And kind of also that innate curiosity, I think, which also kind of connects all these people to one another.
Yeah. Just yes to everything.
Yeah. No, I mean, do you see yourself, I could ask you, about next projects, but also, do you see yourself returning to these characters? I mean, I don't want to reveal anything about the ending, but do you see kind of taking this into the future? Have you ever played around with that idea?
I don't know. I think it's too soon to know.
Okay.
But like, I definitely didn't know that I would come back and try again with them,
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, who knows? Never say never. Right. But I do also, like, I'm not sure, it's, nobody dies at the end, so for sure, yes. I'll spoil that. Nobody dies. But I guess I mean this to be complete and to leave the like questions to the reader about like what do you think happens next?
Yeah, I in no way am saying that this is an incomplete book that does not resolve conflicts and is not. I think that there is, but it does leave it open that there is some kind of like future kind of possibility that I really enjoyed and appreciated. So
That'd be fun.
yeah. Do you want to talk about how your next book is going to be a departure from this, or do we have a minute? Can we talk a little more? Is that fine?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So the book I'm working on next is, it'll be different. I mean, some things will be the same. It's a multi-perspective book again. It's about 4 adult siblings. And in the book, 10 years ago, their father is kidnapped. And so now in the present, they have a new lead and they are working together to find out what happened.
Wow. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's going to be really exciting. Can't wait to read it. Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions? Please, I'm sure that there are a million copies up at the front, and if you don't have a copy, please get one. I'm sure Allison would love to sign it. And thank you so much. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Flyleaf.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
To Maggie and Morella for putting this together. Thank you. And thanks everybody
Thank you for
coming.
coming out.